back to the Daily Grind. Thanks for checking out the channel. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back pickle biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
Nate Diaz took to Instagram, we all know, yesterday, and he said, yo, I'm tired of waiting. I'm sick and tired of waiting on all these motherfuckers. I'm coming back May or June. Now, when he said that, a lot of us were like, okay, but who's he going to fight? Conor McGregor's out. We've got, Tony Ferguson and Khabib. They've got to fight for a title, and then we've got to figure out what's going on with Conor McGregor. So we're like, okay, so who does that leave open for Nate Diaz? And if you listen to the video, I said two of the possibilities are Kevin Lee and Eddie Alvarez. Now, I will say the one that's most realistic is, of course, Eddie Alvarez. For Kevin Lee, this is, I don't want to say a pipe dream, but it's kind of unrealistic for Nate Diaz to accept a Kevin Lee fight. Kevin Lee just doesn't have big enough star power at this point. It's kind of like Conor McGregor, he's got so many options of people to fight, and he's a draw, so it doesn't really make sense for him to fight a high risk, low reward opponent. That's why it's not Conor McGregor's not likely to fight Tony Ferguson, because Tony Ferguson doesn't have a super high value to his name. So it's a really high risk, low reward. So Kevin Lee's probably not going to get this fight. If Nate Diaz does come back and fight anybody, the name that makes the most sense is 100% Eddie Alvarez. And if you remember, right after Eddie Alvarez beat Justin Gaethje at UFC 218, he got on Ariel Helwani's show on the MMA Hour and said that, him and the UFC are talking about a name that rhymes with late Diaz. Remember, he was like, I can't give you the name. And Ariel Helwani was like, does it rhyme with late Diaz? And I was like, yo, that does make sense. Now, why does that fight make sense for Nate Diaz? Because both of these guys are Conor McGregor's former opponents, most recent former opponents. Nate Diaz, you've still got the Conor trilogy. Eddie Alvarez is who Conor McGregor took the lightweight belt from. So if these guys fight, of course, Conor McGregor's going to be all through the promotion. It's going to help sell the fight. And it can be like winner takes on Conor. You know what I'm saying? Winner gets Conor next. But I mean, even then, we don't know what the hell is going on with Conor McGregor. Whew, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But Eddie Alvarez also did take to Twitter and respond. So did Kevin Lee. This is what Kevin Lee had to say. I actually like Kevin Lee's response. I just don't think he'll get the fight. He said, put your money up then, Nate Diaz, or shut the fuck up and go back to riding bikes around the park. I like what he had to say, because Nate Diaz, whenever he was first taking a break after Conor, he was like, yo, it's bike season. I'll come back from fighting whenever I'm done. It's bike season right now. We're racing. And that was like 9 months after. So we were kind of, using, okay, Nate Diaz is, it's bike season. That's why he's not fighting. So that's why Kevin Lee's saying go back to riding bikes around the park. So that's pretty funny. And I do want to see Kevin Lee's next fight. He just came off losing the interim title fight to Tony Ferguson, but he still looked impressive and gained a lot of respect in that fight from a lot of fans. So can't wait to see Kevin Lee get back in there. But I don't think it'll be versus Nate Diaz. Eddie Alvarez, I love the Nate Diaz versus Eddie Alvarez fight, but honestly, the only way I see this fight happening is if Nate Diaz really wants to fight without Conor. If he's done waiting on Conor. He said he's sick and tired of waiting on motherfuckers. But man, it's really interesting because I do think this would be a great fight. My thoughts are, what if Nate Diaz loses to Eddie Alvarez? Do people still want to see the trilogy? I'm sure they will, and as Dana White said, that trilogy's always there. We could literally see Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor 3 years from now. As crazy as that sounds, people would still watch it. Kind of like Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao. People would be over it, but people would still tune in. Now, Eddie Alvarez versus Nate Diaz would be a great fight, a great lightweight fight. It might even have some title implications, but these are my thoughts. Unless Nate Diaz is just getting bored and wanting to fight in the UFC, I mean, he can just go do some hard sparring if he wants to fight. But my thoughts are, why would Nate Diaz take this Eddie Alvarez fight? What's the point? You know what I'm saying? He doesn't want the title. He could have fought Tony Ferguson at any moment for the title. He had actual title shots available. It's not, Nate Diaz isn't coming back for the title. So what do you want him coming back for? Just to fight in the UFC? Just to do them a favor? I just don't think that's really what Nate Diaz wants to do here. So one thing I did think about with him saying May or June, with Nate Diaz saying May or June, that keeps his name relevant until fucking May or June, bro. How long has it been since Nate Diaz fought? We know Conor McGregor hasn't fucking fought since UFC 205. Nate Diaz hasn't fought since UFC 202. It's almost 500 days since Nate Diaz hasn't fought. And if you remember, and this is why I say that, if you remember his last tweet, he said, "Fuck these motherfuckers, I'm off to a new sport. Boxing emojis." What the fuck? He never went and boxed. So he ran with the boxing emojis, and now he's saying, "Fuck that, I'm tired of waiting. I'm gonna fight in May or June." It's like, now what happens come May? Because Dana White just came out and said, "Okay, if Nate Diaz wants a fight, I'll just do that on this video. If Nate Diaz wants a fight, I'm gonna offer him a fight tonight." So we're here from Dana White, but I'm gonna believe Dana White if he comes out and says Nate Diaz doesn't want to fight, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense here. I mean, to me, it seems like Nate Diaz could just be trying to keep his name in the headlines, because just going off of his last tweet where he said, "Fuck the UFC, I'm going to another sport," now he's talking about May or June, I'm ready. And you would think he had already talked to Dana White if he's talking about May or June. Like, I'm working on a deal, not just, you know, a random spur of the moment tweet, May or June, I'm coming back, and Dana White doesn't even know about it. So that means, you know, he hasn't even started negotiating with the UFC yet, and you know how Nate Diaz and the UFC's negotiations go. So Nate Diaz is saying May or June, and to me, Eddie Alvarez seems like a great opponent. Eddie Alvarez versus Nate Diaz makes a lot of sense for Eddie Alvarez, for fans, and for the UFC. But for Nate Diaz, who hasn't fought in forever, the only reason I see him fighting Eddie Alvarez is if he's just getting that itch and wants to go against pretty much everything he's been holding out for. Because if he loses, if he gets knocked out by Eddie Alvarez, it just takes away a little bit from the Conor McGregor fight. So we'll see what happens, man. With that being said, it is what it is. Eddie Alvarez and Kevin Lee responded to Nate Diaz hinting at his UFC return. We'll see what Dana White actually has to say after he talks to Nate Diaz later. I'm out.
Bye, Felicia.